Welcome back. Turning now to the role farmers play when it comes to climate change. Some Americans say they need to be held more accountable.
At the same time, others argue farmers are transitioning on their own quite well. Joe St. George has the debate over possible new environmental reporting regulations that could mean even higher prices for food.
So there's one silk for every kernel of corn.
It's a good crop year for Cy Prettyman, and while I believed him outside the field,
A lot of ears in here.
I really believed him while in it.
Feels like we're in the jungle.
Yeah.
But as much as I'd like to just talk about corn, I'm on Cy's farm today to talk about the SEC. And no, I'm not talking about the college football conference. In government, the SEC stands for the Securities and Exchange Commission. They're tasked with regulating Wall Street and publicly traded companies. The agency has proposed a rule to force those companies to start telling their investors about their climate data, emissions, and risks. You might be wondering, what does Wall Street have to do with Cy's farm in Ohio?
Farmers and ranchers have never been regulated by the SEC.
Cy's concern is that farms often do business with publicly traded companies that may, under this proposed rule, demand farmers start providing details on how much emissions are coming out of their tractors, for example.
These closing wheels come through.
It tells me the typical farmer
These are basically just the tractor controls.
doesn't have the time or the staff to do that.
We've only got limited resources on our farm to do what we do.
Of course, there is another side to this debate, some believing that the country needs to start holding all businesses more accountable for their emissions. And yes, that includes the family farm.
People have died because of climate change.
Stephen Rothstein is with Ceres, a nonprofit focused on making the economy more sustainable. He says the heat from the past few weeks is reason enough to focus more on the climate. If companies must report, it may promote change, he says.
I'm not saying companies have to do certain things for climate. All it says they have to disclose, so then their investors, the market, their owners, can make decisions whether they feel that's good or not.
Rothstein expects a final rule by the SEC by the end of the year, and he suspects there may be changes to make the smaller contributors to companies like family farms exempt.
It's always tough.
As for Cy, who's with the Ohio Farm Bureau, he says farmers will be watching this closely. Lawsuits will likely follow if farms are not exempt, and he says possible increases in food prices may occur, especially if he has to start telling the SEC how much CO2 was emitted from dropping fungicide on this crop.
Potentially that leads to higher costs for the consumer.
In New Bloomington, Ohio, I'm Joe St. George.